What's up, everybody? This is Caesar coming straight from the underground where we're innovating. And why are we innovating? Because we're closest to the problem, and Santa benefits significantly from obtaining a solution to that problem. And what's our problem? Well, we're going to go into that a little bit today. I have this framework up for you that I've been working on that's going to help orient you whenever it comes to making decisions and trying to get through these phases that often block first time entrepreneurs whenever it comes to building the right actual product. Now, what I did here is I abstracted out a lot, and this is coming from a video that I had watched coming from Harvard Innovation Labs, where they were talking about one of the most difficult parts about building a company, and that comes in the form of the actual building phase. What I laid out here right now is these different phases that you have to go through in order to be able to successfully scale a product and turn it into a profitable business. Now, this is coming from learnings that I've experienced, a few things that I've made mistakes in the past, and then coming from new tools that we have in order to be able to expedite the actual development process. What are some of those tools? The advent of artificial intelligence, generative AI, and large language models have really allowed us to be able to expedite that process whenever it comes to identifying a target customer or a target segment and then building a solution and scaling it. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail and then flesh out this actual process in subsequent videos. But right now, like I mentioned, this is super high level and this is something to be built off of because whenever you go into each one of these phases, they get more elaborate. There's more processes, there's more stage gates, and there's more documentation whenever it comes to achieving that end goal. But right now, this is a very simplified version. I named it demand driven startup model, which is really leveraging, like I mentioned, artificial intelligence, redefining that idea of the lean startup where there's a lot of gaps in that literature. Essentially, whenever it does come to explaining the lean startup methodology, it just essentially states go talk to people, get out of the building and go talk to people. And then it tells you to build an MVP, and then it tells you to start making money. So there's a lot of gaps in that literature, and it typically comes from a very academic, very MBA, MIT, Sloan School Management, Harvard Innovation Labs, and MBA type philosophy. And that doesn't necessarily apply into the real world. It's also seen through more or less an investor lens that really doesn't give that support that's needed whenever a first time entrepreneur really goes through that gauntlet. Now, I spelled it out for you here in these particular phases, and I'm adding on to this essentially. Now, I would say that that lean startup is a really good foundational mental model, foundational process. But like I mentioned, in the day of AI, we really need to strengthen that particular aspect. So whenever it comes to building something brand new, a first time product, we do have an ideation phase. So this ideation phase differs in the sense where, yes, we do still need to talk to people. We still need to gather data. We still need to pinpoint an individual. The right approach would be to go through some sort of customer discovery phase. Now, like I mentioned, now that we have tools like ChatGPT, we can scrape forums, Reddit, large data sets in order to be able to create a robust set of data and then run them through these custom GPTs to suss out not only customer sentiment, but also frame pain points, needs, and start ideating on solutions. Now, this is what the Harvard Innovation Lab video was talking about. The riskiest thing is going into that next step. Now, after you've ideate it. After you found the solution, that problem solution fit through that ideation phase, now you can move because now you have a minimum viable feature set, which can quote unquote turn into that MVP, right? But like I mentioned, there's an alternative approach that we can take whenever it comes to actually approaching that specific problem. Now, in that building phase, I've labeled it right here. The building phase is the most high risk, low reward aspect of building a startup. Now, it may be the funnest part now, especially if you're a technical individual or if you're a product manager, you really know how to apply your skill set in this phase. If you're an engineer, you really are trying to solve those problems in order to be able to create a functional product that serves its purpose in the market. But in all reality, especially for a first time startup, this is a negative ROI phase where you're spending money, you're burning money, you're wasting time and resources. There's no, I guess you could say, connection to that end in order to be able to generate revenue. Now, a smart founder would be able to say, I need to get through this phase as quickly as possible. And this is where you would essentially set up your scalable development processes using uh, agile methodology, using a well-aligned product roadmap, and just focus on shipping product as quickly as possible. This is where the traditional thinking of that MVP it comes from, where you find your product or you find your customer, you do your customer interviews, and then you build an MVP. Now, people talk about taking a very low fidelity MVP approach, like essentially hacking something together, which is one approach. But now, in the age of AI, this model really focuses more on leveraging marketing essentially in order to be able to streamline that product development process and in tandem start building your funnel, your sales processes, and your demand in general. That goes counter, or that is flipped on the side of what the lean startup really talks about, where it's build that low fidelity MVP and then monetize. Those two steps are very gray in that phase. So this is meant to be more actionable, right? Where we have identified this essential pain point right here, which is that negative ROI. So, one of the biggest things and biggest mistakes that anybody can make is going into building without finding product market fit. Because if you don't find product market fit prior to this or some sort of indicating signal, then essentially this becomes a vortex, a black hole, and then the chances of failing go up extremely high. If you cannot move from this phase to this phase, the chances of you failing as a startup go up significantly. And this essentially is what a lot of the startup literature lacks as far as how to get from here to here in the most efficient way, right? So what I'm proposing here, and this is what we're talking about in the underground, where now in the age of AI, we can essentially streamline this, de-risk it, go through our customer discovery phase in a more effective manner, like I was talking about, utilizing, I would say, large data sets in order to be able to frame the actual pain point and then develop the solution. Now, this is where my particular approach and where I think the future development is going specifically for consumer facing products and in the software space. Because in the software space, you can iterate quickly, right? You could go to market quickly, and everything is consumer facing. You can build really robust solutions online, and you can get through these learning phases quickly versus a physical product or hardware or some sort of medical device, right? Those are longer development times. They need to de risk longer. Where the advantage of software is, like I mentioned, you can ship pretty quickly if you have the right agile processes and the right tech stacks and infrastructure set up in order to be able to version up very quickly. Now, when it comes to this approach, my specific thinking is there's two aspects, right? You can either pursue that MVP, that low fidelity MVP, putting something on a piece of paper and getting some sort of validation. Well, that doesn't necessarily translate into this next phase, which is scaling and really building out that pipeline. In this phase, in my opinion, that next step is trying to build a lead magnet. Now, that lead magnet is essentially the first thing that you should essentially build whenever it comes to development. This ideation phase, I have something that, like I mentioned, I could go into more detail about it, but the end result is essentially building something of value based off of the pain points that doesn't necessarily give everything away, but gives us some sort of value, demonstrates some sort of interest, and validating it through some sort of robust marketing campaign in order to be able to validate the messaging, the pain points, the problems, to be able to prove, hey, look, this is an actual solution, and to get feedback to iterate on your next product. So, what I'm saying is, your first thing that you build should be a lead magnet that's going into that building phase, because the result of that should be a list of well qualified or qualified customers that the next iteration on your product roadmap, that next feature set, should be some sort of feature set that moves towards testing monetization. So if you take those two things, this lead magnet that's free, that provides some sort of value, that helps you build a list, your next feature set should essentially be able to be something that's monetizable. Now, that essentially really kind of cuts down this negative ROI, right? Because you're building a list of customers and you're gaining feedback from them in order to be able to iterate into a new product that you can move into your scaling phase. The scaling phase essentially kind of follows on that product life cycle, that growth and maturity phase of the product. Once you find that product market fit, once you find people that are willing to pay, then it's time to essentially set up some sort of sales alpha or some sort of outreach campaign or some sort of targeted marketing in order to be able to just scale and try to start closing as many customers as you can. And then also building robust processes on your fulfillment, right? How are you fulfilling the product? And also how you're supporting the actual product. But going back to, like I mentioned, the lean startup methodology, it does its job in the time that it was developed for. But now that we're in a new phase of technology with, like I mentioned, large language models, there is a strong use case of redefining the way that we approach new product development, specifically when it comes to startups, specifically when it comes to software, specifically when it comes to consumer facing products. Like I mentioned, we need to reevaluate the value of an MVP versus a lead magnet. What are we going to build first, especially in a resource constrained environment where going to this step, is a negative ROI event, where you're not going to make money in this space and you need to get out of it as quickly as possible. Well, the challenge is, what new tools, what new approaches, what methodologies do we use now? And I believe that this is going to be a new way of thinking, right? And that's where, like I mentioned, here in the underground, we're thinking differently. We're trying to frame a way of working better, take better approaches, especially when comes to building businesses, building product, things like that, where now we need to implement tools like AI into our workflows whenever it comes to product development. That's one of the things that I'm really interested and really focused on in investigating, doing more research on. And like I mentioned, I believe that this framework is the most abstracted idea when it comes to startups, why some are successful, why some aren't. This is a really good orientation of why Some are obviously not successful because they spend too much time in that build phase and it becomes a black hole. Now we have a better way of being able to ideate, find that, do that customer discovery, which I'd love to go into more details about that. Finding that problem solution fit and then moving towards that lead magnet to be able to collect not only more data but to build the list and then start your outreach process. Once you find that outreach process and move to monetization, then you can start scaling. So these are my thoughts. Like I mentioned, this is what the new age of thinking, the old ways of doing things, especially like I mentioned, that lean startup methodology. It lives in an era where now we need to expand on it. And like I mentioned, this is the beginnings of something that's bigger, more creative. Let me know what you guys think in the comments if this is something that is useful. If you think that AI is going to really change the way that we approach startups, how we de-risk, how we build product, how we ship things, how we, um, just innovate in general. And if you agree on that first initial build out should be some sort of lead magnet, some sort of positive generation versus just a flat out MVP, a low fidelity MVP with a very basic feature set. Let me know. Like I mentioned, this is Caesar. We're here in the underground and we're really getting it. I'll see you guys on the next one and you take care. Peace.